Good evening and welcome to Writers Unplugged. This is a series that will give you a chance to hear your favorite writers or new to you writers in conversation as if you were eavesdropping on us in a coffee shop. My name is Jen Jumba. I'm a librarian at the main branch of Cleveland Public Library. One of my favorite things besides reading is talking to writers. It's an opportunity to get to know their craft, what inspires their stories, where they like to write, essentially getting to know them better and see them as human beings and not just the name on the spine of a book. And this evening, we are so lucky to have Juliet Grames joining us to talk about her soon-to-be published book, like in 4 days, The Lost Boy of Santa Chionia. Before we get started, I want to mention a few housekeeping notes. To find out who else is visiting Writers Unplugged, both virtually and in person, visit cpl.org/upcoming. And Max Backs Books on Coventry, who's also a fan of Juliet, has her copies of her books on order, just waiting for you. And they're our wonderful independent bookstore here in town. And if you have questions for Juliet, put them in the chat. I'll be sure to ask her. So a brief introduction to Juliet. She is the author of The 7 or 8 Deaths of Stella Fortuna, a national and international bestseller, and soon to be The Lost Boys of Santa Chionia, which publishes on Tuesday. Her debut novel was shortlisted for the New England Book Award, the Connecticut Book Award, and received Italy's Premio Centaro, she'll correct me, I'm sure, for contribution to Southern Italian literature. It's been translated into 9 languages, but she also writes essays and short fiction. They've appeared in the Best American Mystery and Suspense, Real Simple, Parade, the Ellery Queen Mystery Magazine, the Boston Globe, among other venues. Since 2010, she has worked at Soho Press, where she is an editorial director. In 2022, she was the recipient of the Mystery Writers of America Ellery Queen Award for her editorial work in the crime fiction genre. So I've been lucky enough to have met and visited with her at conferences, and Juliet is truly an incredibly cool person, just as talented a writer as you will soon see when her book publishes next week. And not only does she possess the ability to tell wonderful stories in writing, but even more so in the course of our conversation, which will leave you a fan like me. So a warm welcome to Juliet Grames.
How am I supposed to come into all of that? That's the warmest welcome I've ever heard. Thank you so much, Jen.
Oh, you're quite welcome. So, here's the thing. We're not supposed to judge a book by its cover. However, I have to tell you that the cover of your new book is absolutely stunning, which we'll talk about in a second. The story is even more stunning. And then when we look at the opening line, so like it kind of puts together this Venn diagram of things that capture readers' attention, right? First, you want something that is absolutely gorgeous that people pick up. And then you kind of have this amazing story that they're kind of alluded to on the back, but it's even more wonderful, all 393 pages of it. And then the opening line just opens and hooks you from the very beginning. So can I read it, or do you want to read it?
Please.
Okay. So my father used to tell me that growing up meant understanding who was at fault wasn't what mattered. What mattered was who had to pay the consequences. And if that doesn't capture you, give you goosebumps, I don't know what to tell you, folks, but it is an absolutely incredible story. So can you give everybody who's watching and listening a brief introduction to this amazing book?
Oh, I would love to, although I really like hearing you talk, Jen, because you make me sound good. So The Lost Boy of Santa Chionia, which you pronounced correctly, so thank you. It's set in 1960 in Calabria, which is the region of southern Italy where my grandmother emigrated from. She was born there in 1920. And it's a story about a 27-year-old American woman named Francesca Lawfield, who is there as a charity worker in a very remote mountain village, one that has, no running water, no electricity, no school per se for the children, no doctor. It's very, very remote. And her job is she's supposed to build a nursery school to help encourage childhood welfare and to reduce childhood and maternal mortality. That's the organization she works for. That's what their mandate is. However, no sooner does she arrive than there's this flood that apparently it floods every year in this town, but it's always catastrophic, and it knocks down the post office, and under the post office is a human skeleton, buried in unconsecrated ground. And she's especially upset, concerned when the police don't come and investigate, and the bones sort of just disappear, and no one looks into why a person was stashed under the post office. So it's shortly after that she's approached by an older woman who says, my son emigrated to America 40 years ago, but I never heard from him again. I just have this feeling that he may be the body under the post office. Can you help me figure out if he really went to America? And that's the beginning of the book. And it's the story of how Francesca becomes a de facto immigrant detective, how she doesn't realize when her inquiry in order to help this one nice old lady may or may not cause a lot of ruffled feathers elsewhere in this village.
Right.
Which may or may not have an endemic organized criminal syndicate operating there. Now, Francesca doesn't really know, but Calabria in 1960, it's a pretty wild place, and people have told her these things, but like, watch out, don't go walking alone, and never at night. That's
exactly. Yeah. I mean, sounds like a typical warning, right? To most places, but this town might be a little bit more sinister, I guess, than that, than one thinks. So I'm struck by, in this massive flood, which it floods every year, but this one being particularly catastrophic, it wipes out the bridge. So they are essentially isolated from the rest of the country.
Yeah, I loved writing about this region of Italy because this very extreme situation of being stuck on essentially a mountain island with no road connecting it to any other town and no resources and no communication to the outside world. It's really the perfect cocktail for a locked room murder mystery. But
absolutely,
it's not a fantasy. This Santa Chionia is an imaginary village, but it was inspired by and geographically based on other villages in this area where people lived. In some cases, they still do live, but a lot of these villages were forcibly depopulated in the middle of the century. And it's a phenomenon I refer to in the book as transferment, which I made a little cognate from the Italian word that is used for this phenomenon. But basically, World War II was really tough in Italy. A lot of the country was left bombed out or way behind in modernization. And the government really struggled to do justice to a lot of the villages there. And there was one strategy for, troublesome villages that were remote or expensive to refurbish, or maybe where there was some resistance or law enforcement issue that the government didn't like, where instead of actually investing in the town, instead of building the road and putting the electronic and water services in there like they did in other villages, they would encourage the population to move. And I think it's just a very provocative cultural apocalypse that occurred in this region and that has left these ghost towns all over Calabria, and many of them being towns that spoke a linguistic minority language called Greco. It was actually a form of Byzantine Greek that had carried on all the way through the 20th century. So, there are these questions about why were these villages forcibly depopulated? What happened to the marginalization that happens in a depopulation movement? Like, what happens to the people after you remove them from their sacred ancestral home where they know how to herd goats, and you move them to the sea where they're supposed to fish? They've never seen the sea before, where they don't have houses, they don't have the heritage of these questions are all facing the citizens of Santa Chionia in this book, and Francesca walks into this maelstrom of tension where some people want a modern life and other people are watching the villages around them that have been forcibly depopulated, and they're saying, we don't want that to happen, we don't want to lose our culture and our heritage.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm joined in conversation with the fabulous Juliet Grames, writer of The Lost Boy of Santa Chionia.
You got it.
Got it. Okay, perfect. It is amazing to me, all the questions that you just talked about. Like, what makes somebody say, yeah, I'm gonna take a risk. So they'll go to America, which is a gigantic risk, right? Yeah. They'll get on a boat, they'll go, across the ocean, but yet they don't want to move from their village to just another part of the country. And so I was struck by that, what's the difference between the two?
That
you
is
know?
that is such a fantastic point that you're making. The Italian diaspora
Yeah.
is it's huge, right? It is one of the biggest diasporas in human history, and I mean there have been a number, but it's a really potent one, and I think a lot of us, Americans, we draw some fragment of our heritage from Italy because people. The emigration was just this country itself was so poor, there was so little opportunity there, and people felt like they were forced out. However, there was that initial impulse to go and emigrate in the Italian diaspora. The idea was you weren't going forever. You were going to make
Was
money and you were going to send money back. And that's why in families like mine and many, when people ask, well, what year did you arrive in the country? It's really hard to say because often there were multiple generations where in my case, for example, both of my great grandfathers came to the United States. They worked on the railroad. They actually met each other working on the railroad, which was a coincidence because later their children got married. But they both of them emigrated back. One of them was here and ended up having to go back to Italy to be with his family and ended up having to fight in World War One when he was there. And the other was much younger, and he was drafted for World War One, fought, really didn't like it, and said, "I'm getting out of Dodge," and that's why he came over to the States in the first place. But
okay.
neither of them during that period naturalized. They weren't intending to. It was later that they started to bring their children over as the situation in Italy changed and Europe
Yes.
was leading up to World War II. And so I think that behind the Italian diaspora is this feeling that it wasn't supposed to be permanent.
Okay.
I know Italian Americans often feel a yearning for connection with that homeland. I think most people of immigrant stock feel that way. We have this longing for the thing that our forebears were forced to leave behind, and we have
Right.
this question about what our lives would have been if we'd been there. The thing that's interesting about the Italian diaspora, which I don't know if this always occurs, but
Okay.
if you are an Italian American and you go to Italy and you visit the village that your people came from, you will be welcomed with open arms. They will have all these documents that show when your predecessors left. It's like they've been waiting for you to come back. There's this two-sided yearning for that lost family.
Wow. Yeah, I don't know that that's true for every
I
every
don't I
heritage.
don't know if it is either, but I have to tell you, Jen, it was
Yeah.
very useful when I was trying to write an immigrant detective mystery because every Italian town has all those documents. And I knew my character was going to need to do a lot of documentary archival research in order to track people down, right?
Sounds like a librarian,
Yeah.
right? Who works in the archives and keeps records of things.
It's
So yeah, no. So I'm joined in conversation by the fabulous Juliet Grames. This is her latest book. You had firsthand experience though, traveling there and how you were welcomed with open arms, at least for your first book. I'm not
I
sure how it
did.
would for your second book.
I did. Yeah, the first time I went to Italy, I really put off going to Italy for a very long time. I grew up with my grandparents, spent a lot of time with them. They took care of me while my parents were working. So I had their language in my
Mhm.
ear from the time I was born. And my grandmother and my grandfather both, they were each in love with their paese, their village that they came from.
Yeah.
So my family wasn't one where they arrived here and they were like, we're Americans now, we're never talking about Italy again. They naturalized by choice, but they
Mhm.
were still really proud of where they had come from. And my grandmother really built up her village, Yevoli, like it was going to be Disneyland.
Yeah.
I always wanted to go there. I had this
Right.
dream that I was gonna someday, when I deserved it, I was gonna go to Yevoli. When I could speak Italian well enough and I understood what I was getting into and I wasn't gonna embarrass myself and my family. And I put it off and I put it off because I never felt ready. I really never
Yeah.
did. And I got to travel a lot of other parts of the world. I studied abroad in different places and I
Yeah.
avoided Italy. I was afraid. And so finally I started to write Stella,
Yes.
and with that novel, it covers their immigration. So
Mhm.
from the time Stella is born in Italy through her when she's 100 years old here in the
Yeah.
States, I just started writing at the point that they arrived in America because everything before that I felt I couldn't. I didn't have the authority, right, to write it.
Right.
And then I wrote from the middle all the way through to the end. And then I was stuck with this novel that had no beginning. And I was like, oh, how do I feel the authority here?
Yeah.
And my now husband
Yes.
was like, you need to just go. You need
Right.
to bite the bullet here. And you're never going to feel like your Italian's good enough. But when you get there, it's probably going to be good enough. So
Absolutely.
I went. So I went. That was the first time I went to Yevoli. I was 30 years old, and I am now 40. So that's how long books take to read.
Well, your book is so beautifully written, and it's like every single word was thoughtfully chosen. It's never, when I read your books, it's never like some of my text messages would ever be where you just kind of like spill. It's like everything is thoughtfully constructed and beautifully written. And I was like, how does she do that? It's amazing.
Thank you. It's a lot of work. You have to have stamina, because I think, I'm a book editor, as you mentioned, by day. And I really think that the biggest barrier for people who are aspiring writers, between aspiring writers and published writers, is the stamina to self-edit. And I have it because I trained by editing other people. So I can edit indefinitely. And there's a point where you have to take it away. You have to be like, no, Juliet, you're done now.
Well, it's kind of like art, right? They say it's never done, it's simply abandoned, right? Like, because otherwise you'll constantly tweak that painting and add another brush stroke here, and then that upsets this balance. So then you go to this. But so if you're an editor, so I'm in conversation with Juliet Grames, The Lost Boy of Santa Chionia. I'm always afraid I'm going to get it wrong. Editor by day. So I'm assuming that means you write by night or overnight, or how does that work? Weekends?
No, I'm a morning.
Oh, you were like one of those 4 a.m.
No, 5.
Okay. You sleep in.
Yeah. In the winter, sometimes my body doesn't honor daylight saving. So sometimes I'll wake up at 4:30 in the winter. But I get up around 5. I work for 2 or 3 hours. I work until my kid wakes up, because then he's like, Mama, let's play. And then that's it. And on unlucky days, he wakes up at 6. And I'm like, oh, we got 1 hour in. Oh! But on lucky days, sometimes he sleeps till 7:30. And then, and then we do our morning routine. We get breakfast and stuff during school time, get him ready for school or whatever. Yeah. And then I turn to my day job at 10 o'clock. We have a nice, our day job working hours are 10 to 6. So. Okay.
Like mine. 9:30 to 6, but same thing. We open at 10 and I'm there till 6. So it's kind of nice.
I try to log somehow 3 hours of work every day. And that's for my writing work. And that takes the form of 2 hours of actual writing, whatever that means, work on a project, and 1 hour of reading, because I do a lot of background reading. I also do a lot of sort of related or unrelated work reading. Like I need to know what else is around me, or if I'm in conversation with another author, I need to study their ouvre, or, things like that.
Absolutely.
So, but the reading I can do at night,
awesome.
In the bathtub. Like typically all my books
are closed, locked.
Yeah. But that's definitely part of reading, is a huge part of my process too. So.
Okay. And so when you're reading, you're able to read for the enjoyment of reading, and can you suspend that big editorial brain of yours at any point, or is it constantly like, oh God, that's not what I would have done there, or I'm not sure that point of view is working, or can you read and just enjoy?
I'm gonna make a confession to you, but you're not gonna tell anybody, right?
I won't tell anybody. Secret is safe.
So it's pretty hard. It's pretty impossible to turn that off.
I kind of figured.
Yeah. And so I really don't enjoy reading anymore. It is work. And that's an absolute tragedy. But there's silver lining, which is that if I do enjoy a book, it is so transportive. Like if I'm reading a book and my editorial brain turns off, it is like it's an incandescent experience. And I think that when I hit that experience of really loving what I'm reading, I before, when I read more casually and it wasn't such a, so plugged into work, a labor effort. I don't think that I was able to hit that level of just like pure, and it's just really special when you find a book like that. So
See, and I think as a reader, when I read yours, like my like time kind of falls away, right? Like I'm like, okay, before we open Juliet's book, we need to make sure we have laundry done. We have to make sure like I'm eating more than cereal for dinner. Those are the kinds of things because I'm truly, you can tell that you spend a lot of time researching to
yeah,
capture that sense of place. And as they're walking up the switchbacks, right? Like I feel that, like I can hear their tread when I'm reading, and I think that that's incandescence, I think is how you refer to it when you read, and that's special.
that's the dream. Having a reader like you is the dream. And I don't think that every book is for every reader. And for me as a writer, the dream is when you find the person who feels that way about the way you write. You don't know going into it. You're not guaranteed that you're going to speak, your own voice. Ideally, if you are an artist, it is original, it is unique
Correct.
to you. And they say a lid for every pot, but it's just when you're a writer and you're going into it, you don't know where your lids are, you know?
No, absolutely, and it's probably no different than other art, like a painting that you and both may look at. I'd say Mark Rothman, and I'm going, wow, that's just like 2 blocks of color, and you're going, oh my gosh, I see this and this and this. So it
No, I'm
resonates
not.
differently.
I'm in the first column, but yeah,
Okay.
it's a great example.
Okay. So let's talk about, since we're talking about artwork, let's talk a little bit. So I'm joined in conversation with Juliet Grames, writer of The Lost Boy of Santa Chionia.
You
So
got it.
let's talk a little bit about this artwork that's on the cover.
Isn't that cool?
It is ridiculously cool. Um,
That is an actual Escher. So
yeah, so I know there's a story there, right?
yes,
As
there
to how
is.
this came to be.
There is. So this is an obscure part of the world I'm writing about. There isn't a lot written about it. In English, there's very little at all. And only, Edward Lear actually did these amazing diaries. He traveled there in 1848 and 1849. And he did, his publication was called Journal of a Landscape Painter. So he actually put some paintings of this area in. But then who else goes to the Aspromonte Mountains and visits these Greco-speaking villages? It's very, very remote. And, during the grand tour, that itinerary really looked on this part of town as sort of brigand ridden and not a place to go. However, Escher went there in 1930 and 1931, and he sketched, and he went to some of these villages, like the one you see on the cover there. That's a village called Polizzi. Yeah, and it is so dramatic. If you can see, first of all, there is that tower up top above that cliff face. It's hanging above the hill.
Yeah.
And another thing is, off to the side, there's a bridge that goes over the gully that connects Polizzi to the next town over. And in the gully, this is how long this village has been, this little island up there. Against the bridge are actually the latrines. There's like this stone building where people used to use them as latrines, and you would just basically, do your business directly into the river below because there was no running water. I mean, it's really, and so, that Polizzi is actually a gorgeous village. It's still there. It's still populated. And it's one of 2 villages that I used sort of an amalgam of to create the geography of Santa Chionia. So when my amazing publisher, Knopf, was like, oh, we're about to commission the cover design. We want to ask you, do you have any things that you love or hate or things you definitely don't want to see on the cover? You can recuse yourself from this. We can just take care of it for you. Or if you have any suggestions, I just replied and I was like, you guys are the professionals. So do whatever you want and don't take my advice here. But if you want to consider this, could we do something inspired by this beautiful Escher sketch of this village that was the geographical inspiration for, or architectural inspiration, I should say. And they just came back with this, and they were like, what if we license the actual Escher? I'm over the moon. It's just like, you're an author, you don't think you're going to get what you want with a cover. And they went beyond that. They just,
and then the colors that complement it and don't compete with it. It's so well done.
I know they're so smart. They're so good at what they do.
Yeah. I mean, cause it literally draws your eye. You see that sitting there and it's like, oh my gosh, I think I was at PLA and there were like 2 copies left on the table. I don't know how many people I kind of knocked over and elbowed out of the way, which I said I would never do because I kind of happen to know some people who will send me if I need something, or there's, NetGalley. I was like, get out of the way. I was like, I have to have it. So yeah, so well done. So let's talk a little bit about the main character, right? Francesca, right? So you chose to write about a time period, 1960, right? Which is already rife with tensions in the world, right?
Yeah.
Women and their role and things that are unfolding in the course of history.
So many changes in 1960. It's that clash moment between old and new, really. People are
Absolutely.
still recovering from the devastation of World War II. And there's a ton that has been left behind and needs to be modernized, but there's also a lot of conversation about how things should be.
Mm-hmm.
And not all of it's right. Not all of that conversation's right. And that was interesting. Francesca is an aid worker. She's a charity worker. And I really wanted to look at a person who is dying to do good. She's dedicated her life to serving other people, to humanitarianism, but necessarily humanitarianism during this time and now can be a form of colonial violence, because you are imposing what you think is best upon people who may or may not come from the same set of pressures or biases that you do. And so she's really struggling with that every day. She wants to make a difference, and she's often caught between a rock and a hard place, between the thing she thinks is right and the thing that she knows she has to do. And so, yeah, I thought 1960 was a super interesting time to set this. I set it there for that reason. I really wanted to look at the role of women and how that was developing, both in Italy and in the world at large. And I should say within a family structure, but also within the mafia. I don't want to spoil anything, but look, mafia is relevant when you talk about Calabrian history. So, that's a topic in this book. And I wanted to look at, so Francesca, she's born in 1932. So she's 27 years old when we meet her. She is born in Philadelphia she's a lot like me in her bio data. So her dad's a big, tall Scandinavian guy, and her mom is a Calabrian, like a fiery Calabrian. And they met in Philly. And so she's got this sort of half, she's got the ear of nativity for the Italian way, but she has these other biases that make her really American. And she went to Barnard College. I modeled some strokes of her life off of a real person, a writer named Anne Cornelissen, who's she was a Guggenheim Fellow who graduated from Vassar College. Her bio data, her dates are the same as Francesca's. So she graduated from Vassar College and moved to Italy in 1954 and worked for Save the Children, which is a real organization, an excellent organization you should be aware of. They were founded in World War I with the hope of trying to save children's lives in the aftermath of war. Like the motto being that every war is a war against children, right? Which is just true.
Yeah, they're the one. Yeah, absolutely.
So my Francesca, so Anne Cornelissen worked for Save the Children starting in 1954. My Francesca works for an organization called Child Rescue, which doesn't exist, but is very thinly veiled. And they have the same mandate. And I knew that she was going to have come from a sort of finishing school background. She's got these progressive liberal college ideas, but she's also very much trapped by her own biology and by her circumstances, to try and always, that's the really interesting part of women in this generation, women who are committed to making a difference and have these limitations that we don't. And I got to interview some absolutely fantastic women, who were going to Barnard College during this period, who were growing up in Philly during this period in Italian American families. I mean, the background research for this, the interview portion was fascinating. So
I'm fascinated by the character. So I'm joined in conversation with Juliet Grames, writer of The Lost Boy of Santa Chionia, and I'm struck by Sabrina. Can we talk a little bit about her? So you talk about how, Francesca is working for this charitable organization, but she has kind of a mentor or supervisor or guide, so to speak, in terms of this work. And some of the advice that she gives her like the tension that exists with that piece of advice, knowing what Francesca's up against at that moment, to me is just stunning.
Yeah. So Sabrina is another. I made the character, I invented the character of Sabrina, but Anne Cornelison, the real, the real woman who worked for Save the Children, she had a mentor like that, and named Gianna Thompson. She was a half Italian, half British woman who founded Save the Children in Italy, and I found her life story extremely provocative. Um,
Mhm.
and so I invented a character to sit in Francesca's conscience, the way um the way Sabrina does in the book. And I'm so curious, if you can say it without spoiling, is there a piece of Sabrina's advice that you particularly wanted to talk about? Because I may have a background story for it.
There are a couple pieces, and this won't spoil it, but she talks about if you want to lead a life of true activism on behalf of others, you must think of yourself not as the engine,
Yeah.
right, of change, but a conduit. You are not the battery, you are a wire.
Yeah.
The energy for change flows through you, not from you. And
Mhm.
I thought that was just stunning, because so many times people come in and like, I know better. I have a different experience, life experience. And like, you should have running water. Like
Yeah.
you should have kids that are learning,
Yeah.
and educated. So it opens up opportunities as the world becomes smaller because things are more connected.
Yeah.
But I was struck by that with, it's that subtle way of changing things where you
Yeah.
become assimilated
Yeah.
and then you're able to give guidance. I was blown away by that piece of
Yeah.
advice.
So I can't take credit for that. That comes from a real activist. Um,
Okay.
and I am so glad that you brought it up, because I'm honored to have a chance to talk about. I received that anecdote about don't be the battery, be the wire.
Hmm.
There was an activist named Brad Will who was murdered while advocating for it's a really, you should read the story. So I received this story from a book called Direct Action by L.A. Kaufman. And I read it during a recent time in our history when there was a lot of demonstrating going on. And I was feeling like I wasn't sure if demonstrating was enough or if I wanted to be involved in demonstration. And Direct Action is a handbook for how to think about your own involvement in civic discourse and how to make change as an activist.
Okay.
And L.A. Kaufman was good friends with Brad Will, and in her preface, she tells this story.
Okay.
I found it so affecting. So I'm grateful to her for giving me the permission to use it with this character, but also I'm really grateful for this chance to talk about it and spread it, because I think it's just such an important concept that you have to be open to the idea that the good that can be done, it may not be the good that you're seeing. You have to keep your eyes open and ready to receive, what is good in a situation. You can't just be an evangelist for what you think is the right way to live, because you can harm people along the way, and people might really need your help, and you might have services that might be really, really useful to them if you can be more open to their energy and open to what they need.
It kind of sounds like a model for life, right? Like if we want to find ways to get along a little bit better, is that you kind of have to know the perspective of where the other person is coming from.
Yeah.
Because sometimes what you think is right may not be appropriate given that particular area,
Yeah.
right? Like you talk about like, oh my gosh, it's great to have public transportation, right? Because you get people to jobs further away. Okay, where in the heck in Santa Chionia are you going to build
Right.
public transportation? Because there are roads and there's elevation and pitches. So a recommendation like that, yes, makes sense. Okay, more people can have jobs. They don't have to live close. But if it's physically not possible, then that doesn't really help things.
Yeah, where your investment can be best used, right?
Right, absolutely.
Totally. It's I find it very compelling. Thank you for bringing that up. Really
Oh
compelling.
yeah, she was a great character. All the characters are great, and I love. Can we talk a little bit about Francesca's landlady, like who she lives with?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
First, I want to say for the record, my lawyers recommend that I state that Chica is not based on a real person. She is completely fictitious, and I never met anyone exactly like that in my life. So,
No one will know.
so Francesca, when she arrives in Santa Chionia, she needs a place to live, and most families in the village live in a one-room house, right? They're sharing all the children, the adults, the goats and chickens, who, part of Francesca's mission is to get the animals out of the house for hygiene purposes. But most houses do not really have room for her unless she wants to, sleep on a cot with 6 other people in the same room, which is not her lifestyle.
Right.
Chica, who's
Yes.
70 years old and, I would say set in her ways, she inexplicably has a 2-bedroom house all to herself. So she is able to rent a room to Francesca. And so Francesca lives with her. However, when we meet her, she's been there for a couple weeks, and we realize that they are already at odds, to the point that Francesca's wondering if she shouldn't just go sleep on one of those cots in someone else's chicken goat full.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Chica's, she's a larger than life character despite her diminutive stature.
Yeah, there is a feistiness to her that I think sometimes causes them to kind of butt heads, but at the same time, I think it speaks to who Francesca is, that she's also just as feisty, even though she might be going about it a different way.
Thank you.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's absolutely awesome. So the other thing that comes up, there's lots of things that come up in this book, and it's sad that we only have roughly an hour to talk, is how nuanced it is with things that are happening. Like in this part of the world, there's something known as reparative marriage.
Oh yeah.
You have, I don't know if you want to explain or if we
I
a little bit about it. I think it's an important thing to think about.
Yeah.
And that tension that exists.
Yeah. So as background here, I will say that women in Italy have had a time catching up with equal rights. So in the moment we meet Francesca in 1960, women are citizens of Italy, but they've only been citizens for 15 years. So it was World War II. Before that, they were B-class personages. So they had about as many domestic rights as a donkey. And there are other problems that are still in full effect. It's actually 1996 is very, very much within living memory, is when the law code is changed to reflect things like legalizing divorce. So up until 1996, if you were in an abusive marriage, you could not divorce your husband. You could get annulled by the Catholic Church, but you would have to prove either non-consummation of the marriage, which, that's hard to prove, most marriages, or there are a number of other, but it was very, very difficult to obtain an annulment. And divorce was just out of the question. So if you were in an abusive marriage, that just was your lot in life. Another thing is that rape was not a criminal offense. It was a crime against social morality.
Yes.
So it was in a different code of law than criminal offenses. And it meant that, you didn't want the morality of the public around you to be compromised by having, really the concern was premarital sex was what you didn't want. It wasn't about violence against women. So that meant that if, say a man and a woman had sex before marriage, consensual or not, that would have been a crime against God, against social morality, but could fix it by getting married. If they got married, they could repair their social crime. So reparative marriage, or the local term in Sicily and Calabria, the word is fuitina. And I use that word in the book.
Yes.
It actually means elopement, and it applies to any marriage where presumably the husband and wife have sex before marriage, and then they fix their sin by getting married. So it's actually, fuitina is used, it has like one charming connotation, which is like, say there's a young couple who they're in love and they want to get married, but their parents forbid them to, or whatever. And
Yeah.
actually courtship and fathers rejecting suitors is a big part of this story too.
Absolutely.
That would happen. So say a courtship is rejected, but the couple still wants to get married. They might go run away and spend a night at, say, an aunt's house. And then the thing is, in the morning, it would be assumed they had had sex. So the only thing that could happen is a reparative marriage where their parents allow them to get married to save them before God. Or it can also just refer to an elopement if you're trying to save money on a big wedding. But fuitina can also apply to a situation where a man really wants to marry a woman and she doesn't want to marry him. So he makes it so that she has to marry him. In other words, he kidnaps her and he rapes her. And after that, in order to redeem her soul, she will have to marry him.
So he gets what he wants.
He gets what he wants. And this is not, I mean, I hope that everyone who's hearing this is horrified.
Yes.
But this is the problem with patriarchy. When you have a system where women have no rights and they are nothing but sexual objects and they're not acknowledged as people, like, why shouldn't they be objects that men covet and think that they can claim for their own? I mean, it makes this sick logic within a sense where you give women no rights.
Right.
So this would happen. It came up a lot during my research, and so inevitably it came up in the book. So there's actually a really brave woman, a Sicilian woman named Franca Viola, who this happened to her. A man wanted to marry her. She refused. He and some buddies kidnapped her, and he did his part to ensure that she would have to marry him. And after the fact, she was like, "No, I'm not going to marry you."
Yeah.
The problem for him then was he had committed a crime, right? He'd committed a crime against public morality. He could have repaired it by marrying her, but if she's not going to play along, he's in trouble. So he sues her to make her marry him. Her priest gets on the case, is like, "Don't you want to save your soul? Come on, I'm worried about God here. Like, just marry this guy. He's doing the right thing. He's doing the honorable thing." And she's like, no, she's not going to do it. She actually had to take her case to the Italy Supreme Court to fight for her right not to marry her rapist. And that was in 1970. And
not that long ago.
It was not
when you think about
no. I mean, this story is very recent, and like this woman's bravery can't be understated. Like the pressures around her to just
right.
Ooh, I think I cut out. Sorry.
You cut out for a second. Yeah, the pressures around her. It's the last I heard.
Yeah, the pressures around her to succumb. There were so many of them, and she never gave up. So this is 1960. This is a time when these things were happening. But during my research, I actually found examples of other women who had stood up to the system, who did try to fight back, and I found those stories really inspiring.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I read this whole book and I think, like, my goodness, I'm so lucky. We are so lucky that a lot of this has changed. The thing that I'm struck by is the fact that this is a relatively isolated, insular community, right? Mm-hmm. So, everybody kind of knows everybody.
Yeah.
Right. And so, that I do one thing and the impact that it has, is kind of like a set of dominoes. I mean, it's different like in the world today where, you may do something that has a little bit of an impact, but it doesn't ripple like it does within this community, right? Yeah. So a lot of times people are doing things not just for the sake of themselves, but in the book, but for the sake of their community in which they're a part of.
This is the beauty and the horror of a village, because you are so intertwined with all of the people there. And it means that, if you have a scenario where there is abuse or where there is violence or where someone is mentally ill and, needs help, there's all of these networks that are preventing the conversation from being had, because there are these soft protections that keep the structure going, right? Everyone is a cousin. Everyone knows everyone else. You tolerate bad behavior because you have to get up the next morning and see that person again. And I really noticed this when I was living in my grandmother's village in 2015 when I was researching Stella. It's a you can't get away from it. The flip side is that in the same community that is so small, that has to depend on itself, you have these acts of heroism and of people really extending themselves beyond what our expectations are. And that's the beauty side of it. Villages are really interesting places. And the thing is, we do make our own villages. We are a more mobile people. You know, we travel around the world. Americans often don't live within 50 miles of where they were born, never mind within 50 feet.
Yes.
Which is not the case everywhere. So we don't think of ourselves as being part of villages, but I think there's actually an allegorical story here about how we may do violence, or we may do heroism, heroic acts in the villages we make for ourselves, and thinking about what those are, and when maybe it's good to break away from them, or when it's good to come out and support them. We're all part of some kind of village.
Absolutely. And it kind of reminds me, I don't know if you read Dreamland by Sam Quinones.
No,
and
I
it
have.
talks about how the opioid epidemic is kind of unfolded, and it's multifaceted, you know, besides just pill factories and smuggling. But he goes back to the sense of community. And Dreamland used to be a pool like in the southern Ohio area where everybody knew everybody, right?
Yeah.
And now we live in places where we don't always know our next door neighbors or the people that live across the street. And like before, as a kid, you'd be terrified to do anything wrong because the neighbors would be like, yep, Jen had a bunch of cars over.
Yeah.
Well, you guys out of town. Like, so everybody kind of watched out for each other.
Yeah.
So on one hand, yes, that sense of community, but on that other hand, there's that sense of
surveillance.
Everybody knows what's happening.
Yeah.
So yeah, very interesting. He thinks that if we were more community oriented, then maybe we would be able to watch out for each other before things really took a tragic turn.
They do show that people in small villages often live longer. There are all these statistics about, you know, Italian mountain villages. So,
yeah, it's interesting. So, just, you know, Sabrina comes back again in terms of like judgment, right? You have to be braver than your own judgment. And I'm struck by that because there's so many things, I want to say, like worlds colliding in this book, and like Francesca struggling with like what's the right thing to do and what's the impact that's going to have, because you mentioned early on, right, that there's a body that's underneath the post office, right? But there's more than one person that comes up to Francesca to say, I think that might be so-and-so.
Yeah.
So like several young men have gone missing.
Yeah.
And because there's not a police force per se to investigate things, it's a challenge.
Yeah. Yeah.
Very, very much a challenge. So
yes, thank you.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And then the other thing I'm struck by is one of the quotes from the book is, honor is defined as putting your own life on the line to protect other people's freedom.
I love this. I love what has been important to you, because the first line you cited was, you know, it wasn't mine. I borrowed it, but the other two were. So
no, I mean, they're okay. I'll read you like my favorite line from the book, because you have a way with words, right? So Francesca is talking and she says, I had always been a hoarder of human emotional experience and knot my scars together like a fisherman's net, the molting crab caught inside of which is my own damn self. I mean, just like, I mean, it was one of those things like, you know, there's so many wonderful lines in this book that you just want to take and write down and tuck away into your pocket. You're having a bad day and you just pull it out and you're like, okay, this is my fisherman's net, you know? So, you know, so well done.
Thank you so much.
And like the conditions in which she's sleeping, and like, Chica, the fact that she takes to go and do laundry with her clothes, that, yeah, and make sure she cooks for her. There's like this sense of obligation to take care of a guest.
Yeah.
And very rarely does she ever answer Francesca's questions directly. It's kind of like almost like a therapist, like, well, what do you think that means? Or what do you think it could be? Right. Or like a kid, like, well, why is this? Well, I don't know. Why do you think it might be like that? Right.
I love the concept of, you know, there's a lot of homage to classic crime fiction in the construction of
Yes.
this novel, because I'm crime fiction editor, and I
Right.
think if there are other genre hounds out there, I hope they'll read it and they'll spot the Easter eggs and they'll have a great time with it. But one necessary genre homage is when you have a detective. The detective needs a sidekick. You need a Holmes and a Watson. And I just thought,
exactly.
wouldn't it be great if actually your investigative partner was giving you really sideways, sort of not dishonest answers to questions, or playing pranks on you constantly, or withholding information, or like, wouldn't that be great?
Yes. So exactly. Everybody needs to, oh my gosh, it's been a while. To read your latest book, Juliet Grames, best-selling writer. This is The Lost Boy of Santa Chionia. Publishes on Tuesday. So you all will be amazed and love it, hopefully as much as I did, if not more, if that's possible. So as we're kind of wrapping things up, right?
Before we run out of time, can I just give a shout out to my gals at Max Backs, because that bookstore
isn't it amazing?
So special. I've only been to Cleveland once, and I don't know how many hours I spent at Max Backs, but I'm really hoping to go to Cleveland again. And I know where my first stop is, and they're
not me. Sorry, Max Backs.
Well, I assume I'm meeting you there, right? And
well, absolutely, because Tommy's
right next door, so we can have lunch and then sustain us while we're rooting through the piles.
Yeah, no, Suzanne, who owns Max Backs, is an absolute gem. She knows exactly what to put in people's hands. I walk in there, like there's a couple things on my list. I walk out with a stack. Max Backs is awesome. They love you. They were like, oh my gosh, I cannot wait. So yes, big love for Max Backs. Okay, so here's final 5 questions. Santa Chionia is an isolated atop a mountain. Do you fear heights or darkness more?
Heights.
Yep. Yeah, I had butterflies when she was walking with Hugo along the edge. I was like, oh, step back. And I was like, this is a book. But yet, I was like, oh, got the butterflies.
No one has asked me that yet. I do not like heights, and I do not like enclosed spaces. So it's just yeah.
Okay. Good to know. Because it was the whole, like, don't
things may come into play in this story.
Yes.
Written with terror.
Yes. What dish would you have Chica prepare for you?
Pasta with mushrooms.
Oh, right on. I did the same thing. And then guess what I had for dinner that night?
Chica gives Francesca this bowl. She describes it as like brown and soupy, and she's eating it. She says, it's so delicious. What do you call this? And Chica's like, pasta with mushrooms. It's just so simple, Mm-hmm. But yeah, it's porcini mushrooms. And actually, pasta is pretty rare in the cuisine in the Aspromonte.
Yes, because it's mostly lentils. As a vegetarian, I was like, sweet.
Bingo. Actually, for vegetarian cuisine, someday I hope I get to make like a little cookbook, because there's rich vegetarian cuisine here. There's so much you can do with it. There's also a lot of meat. So, but like the main protein sources are lentil and goat milk ricotta cheese.
Yeah. So, see, I could live there, right?
Yeah, you do great.
Yes. Okay. So Francesca is tasked with building a nursery school, right, to teach the young children. What was your favorite subject in school? Like, think I know, but I don't know.
I don't know how to pick that. I was a school nerd.
It's okay. So was I. I'm a librarian, for crying out loud, right?
My least favorite subject was chemistry. I really didn't like it.
Seriously?
Yeah.
I loved it.
I did not do so well at chemistry.
I loved it because there was only one answer. And so my little like concrete black or white brain was like, there's only one answer. Plus, like, the star basketball player sat next to me.
I guess from the beginning, I have been a person who is prone to BSing, and that led me toward my path in fiction. And that BSing is not good when you're trying to do chemistry.
No, it is not. So, however, it suits you incredibly well, because I would have said history is your favorite subject, given how much research is in the writing.
Well, that's the thing. How I was trying to pick between, was it English or was
It's
it
your
history? But I don't know. I really love foreign languages. I don't know.
Well, no kidding, because there's like there because it's the Greco language. There are a lot of times where it was like Kalimera. I'm like, oh, that's Greek. That means good morning. You know, I mean, you could intuit it from the book, but it was just nice to see the language sprinkled throughout. So
I'm fascinated by all that stuff. I never want to stop learning, and it's why I write. I mean, I do like writing, but I love research.
Yes.
So writing is an excuse to keep learning stuff.
Oh, perfect. How do you relieve stress? Not that you would ever be stressed,
I don't relieve stress. I try to use it as sort of a gasoline to fire my. I recently took up playing the violin. So I played when I was a kid, and I hadn't played in like 20 years, and it was really hard at first. But about 2 years ago, I do it instead of meditating because I'm too, high functioning anxiety to like really get anything out of meditation except stressing about the things I should be doing instead of meditating. But when I play music, I have to focus on the music. I have to focus on working hard, and it becomes meditative. So it was hard to sort of reclaim that skill in my old age. My tendons hurt a lot at first, but I got there. And so I play violin for a little while every day.
That's awesome. Is there a particular go-to piece?
Yes.
Dare I ask? I used to work for a classical radio station, so I fell in love with strings.
So I will tell you, but I'm really bad. Like, I'm not good at it. But I've been working for the last 6 months on Bach's Chaconne from the D minor partita. It's like my favorite piece of music, and it's really difficult. And a musician said to me, like, if you love it that much, just try to play it. It doesn't matter if you don't play it well, you'll get there. So I did. And that's what I do. I play that for about an hour every day. And my husband hasn't divorced me yet, so because he's a very patient man.
And the final question: what is your phone wallpaper?
It's a picture of my husband's giant sausage fingers. He's also an Italian American, and he's holding a frog that he caught the day we got married. We got married at my parents' house, and there was in the rock wall where all the guests were coming in, and there was this giant frog, and he was afraid it was going to get squashed, so he caught it and he took a photo of it.
That's awesome.
Yeah, this has been a very romantic little conversation.
Yes. So I'm joined in conversation this evening with best-selling writer Juliet Grames. This is her latest book, The Lost Boy of Santa Chionia. Eventually it's going to roll off my tongue, but we're almost out of time. But absolutely awesome. And if you haven't read the 7 or 8 Deaths of Stella Fortuna, go back. There's such things as binge reading. So I want to thank all of you who are here this evening for listening and watching. And a huge thank you to Max Beck's Books for making sure that they are ordering and have plenty of copies of Juliet's new book for you. A huge thank to our tech team, also known as Mike, for making sure everything looked and sounded well this evening. And then finally, a huge thank you to Juliet Grames for spending time with us this evening. Like the best job in the entire world.
Because, I've got a book going on sale in 4 days, and it's a very nervous time, and to have this very generous sort of launch pad, this first conversation before I have to get out there, you've put my mind at ease. You've given me
how you could be nervous. It is absolutely like beautiful writing, so wonderfully nuanced, lots of issues that'll absolutely make you think. And I kind of liken it to like a really good hangover, because you'll be thinking about these characters, you'll be thinking about the issues, like what would I have done, how would I have handled that, long after you turn the last page.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, so if you just want to stay for 1 second. Thanks to all of you. I'm Jen Jumba with Writers Unplugged, and happy reading.